ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the making of Arbour Games. I decided to change the title of this episode from Making of the Fuel Speedway to the Making of Arbour Games because, well, it's behind the scenes of the first pay-per-view. And in this episode, we follow Mood Swing, and I will discuss, what went behind how I created this particular short story and, where the inspiration comes from and so on and so forth. So in this episode, we finally get to the pay-per-view, which has a couple of match races that basically dictate, the outcome of the rivalries that we've seen so far. We get, Solo versus Dawn in the headlining event. We get a relay race that begins the entire event, and then we get the personal race between between John Kloof and Jim Keek, which was established in the past two episodes. So in this episode, we finally get a breakdown into our favorite puppeteer, our favorite puppet master, our favorite ultimate showmaker's mind, which is how he thinks of these things, how he comes up with them. And what we basically get is that he combined Formula One with professional wrestling and tried to give it the prestige of boxing. And he somehow came out successful, even though he sometimes doubts himself, as seen at the beginning of the episode, when he asks what on earth possessed him to put Formula One and wrestling together. Either way, he has, and what has come about is actually something quite unique and quite cool. Although he has even his own business partner questioning, what on earth is wrong with him. Like when we finally get to Jim Keek versus John Kloof, and Glenn straight up asks him, how can you let this happen? You're talking about a man's wife possibly, being treated as something by Jim Keek, and how is that entertainment? But Mood Swing, turns around and says that, hey, these people can actually walk away at any time they want to. They cannot agree to the race and actually go their own way. Instead, they didn't do that. Instead, they showed up because this is where they want to be. They don't have to be here. It's not, as much as it's a school playground, it isn't actually a school playground. You can actually leave whenever you want to, and they chose to stay here because, this is where they want to be. And Mood Swing, stands by that. But we also see from Mood Swing how he put everything together, and we actually get an insight into the fact that he's actually thought this through. He wasn't just sitting around saying, okay, F1, WWE, let's put them together. No, he actually sat down and thought about how would we put these things together and make them into a production that actually makes sense. And he talks about the build-up of the race car. He talks about how he put these rivalries together. He talks about the fact that, the formulary, which is basically the social network of Formula X, how that comes into play, how the audience and what they want comes into play, and how he feeds them things in order to get a certain outcome that will build a rivalry. How that rivalry then must translate into a box office success. He actually puts thought into that. He puts thought into what makes the main event or the feature race when it comes to Formula X. What makes that, what makes it the race that everyone comes to see, which is basically what it amounts to. He wants that to be the biggest race of the night. That is the reason why everyone is here. And he actually expresses that. He says that out loud. He even says how the nicknames come into play when he lists off how the big one, the feature race is going to be built. Like, it's going to be not just Solo Makubane versus Thorn Oberhauser. It's also going to be the franchise versus the Impaler. It's also going to be the Abominable Seduction versus the Devil's Advocate. All of those come into play. The kind of stuff that you put on a poster, the kind of stuff that will make people go, whoa, I want to go see that. And Mood Swing actually expresses that idea out loud, well, at least in his head. And he actually, every single plot point, he actually expresses how this is going towards his vision or it's going against it. He actually envisions how this is going to make him rich because it's actually playing out the way he wanted it to and the way his mind played it out to. At the end of the episode, we actually get to see this crown, the Formula X crown, this studded golden helmet that stands as the championship that everyone is after. It's the one thing that everyone should be chasing. It's the reason that all these racers wake up in the morning and go and race. The Formula X crown is introduced in this episode. Now, in terms of Arbour Games, that title, that name, I came up with it. It actually started out as Arbour Day because this pay-per-view happens in September. It happens when, spring is breaking out and, the woos of winter have gone. And that's why I named it, Arbour Day. And then I changed it to Arbour Games because I realized it is a game. Same way that, the Game of Thrones, they say it's a game. Hunger Games, they talk about the theme of the fact that it's supposed to be a game, even though people die and those things. But anyway, in here, it's a game. And Mood Swing recognized that it's a game and it's happening in spring. So, hey, let's call it Arbour Games. Because one thing he didn't want was for all of these special events to be called Grands Prix. Because that's how it's pronounced, by the way, Grands Prix, not Grand Prix. But in case you don't know, I'm going to explain that. But Arbour Games, he didn't want it to be called a Grand Prix. He wanted it to just stand by itself. The reason for that, I'll explain it later, much later, when we get into that, because he wanted each to stand by itself, to be its own entity, to live on its own, its own feet. He wanted it to be unique. The one thing he did not, the one thing he actually did take from wrestling but did not take from Formula One is that he wanted the pay-per-views to be something to look forward to in their own right. He wants people to be able to refer back to Arbour Games and refer to that epic Makubane versus Oberhoser race, because this is the first one. This is the first pay-per-view. It's the first big event, and he wanted it to go down in history. And I believe that by the end of the episode, he was sure that it did. He opened the episode as lively as possible. Welcome to Arbour Games. And the episode ends just as powerful as that. And the new Formula X King. So he's really the showman. He really wants to put on a show, and he really wants people to enjoy what they're seeing. And I think that's what we get at the end of this episode. Once again, there's that whole short story thing where it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it's even more than that, because this is the final, the ending of the first chapter, so to speak, of this ongoing series. This is where the first batch of storylines finally comes to an end, and now we get to start over. But like professional wrestling in and of itself, this might only be the beginning of a bigger arc in terms of other people who are going to face each other again. You can certainly hope that Solo and Dawn won't see the last of each other now that Dawn is the king. Surely Solo will want to prove that he's still he's better than Dawn. So all in all, it's the end of some things, the beginning of others, and just the next chapter. So look forward to the next one, I guess.